everyone, and welcome to the SAFCA webinar, where we're going to discuss Debbie Goodman's new book, The Living Room Leader. For some of us, it was the kitchen room leader, the patio leader, the bedroom leader, no pun intended. But it really is a wonderful opportunity for us to just look at the world of work, how things have changed as we come out, which is hopefully the worst of the pandemic, and look at what leadership principles and policies have changed in this new hybrid world that we're living in. In terms of the protocols for this afternoon, please use the Q&A function to ask questions, make comments. There will be a prize for the person with the most interesting question and comment. You will get a copy of Debbie's book. We'll also have copies of the book available at the SAFCA conference in May. For those that can't get their hands on the book and will be attending the conference, there'll definitely be a few copies available at the conference itself. Debbie, let's go to the meat and potatoes of why we're here today. It's really to talk about you, about the book. So I'm going to hand over to you. I'd love you to give us just an overview of the book itself, of the things that are going to change, things that leaders need to take into consideration. And then as you engage, please, audience, feel free to ask questions, make comments later on after Debbie's finished her overview. If you want to make a comment or ask a question in person, use the raise hand function. We hope you enjoy this interaction. And Debbie, thank you so much for being here all the way from the US. So it's 7 o'clock in the morning for you. That's why you look so fresh and bright. Thank you for joining us. I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome everybody. I'm so impressed that people are still signing in to Zoom webinars. So thank you very much for being here. Let me do my screen share. So one moment. Okay, let's get there. All right, so I'm actually going to keep it on slide mode so that I can still have a view of what's happening in the room. Do you know that it is exactly 2 years to the week where South Africa went into hard lockdown? So it's kind of fortuitous that we're having this conversation now. 28th of March, I believe the date was, when the country went into a very, very hard lockdown. And I want to give you a little bit of a backstory to the Living Room Leader. I live in Los Angeles now. I'm from Cape Town, and I was at a ski resort, Squaw Valley, and all of a sudden there was all the news that started coming in right about mid-March that the world was going to start to close down, and then there was some rumors that commercial airlines were going to start to close down. And I could think of nothing worse than being stuck in a ski resort because I hate skiing. So I've got to get back home. And I got back home. I started pre-warning my team back in South Africa that we're probably going to need to get everybody out the office and start preparing for this work from home scenario. This was before the US was about 2 weeks ahead of South Africa in the announcements. And then once everybody was settled in their work from home setup, I called my publisher because there was a completely different book. I just spent the whole of 2019 writing a different book called Inside the Interview, and it was ready to go almost. I was just needing to press the green light, and I realized that something very significant was happening in the world, and that things were going to fundamentally change. And I had no idea what was up ahead. And so I said to my publisher, listen, please just press pause for now. I don't know where things are going. Anyway, that book actually never ever saw the light of day because things really did change. It's changed irrevocably in some ways, even though we're now starting to emerge from this 2-year, very, very interesting social experiment. Let me give you a little bit of context to my business, because I think that's going to help with the rest of the insights that I'm going to share with you. So I run a group. I'm the group CEO of Jack Hammer, which is a group of executive search companies. We have our big business in Africa, originally from South Africa, but we work across the continent. We help companies find their leadership teams, have built their leadership teams. I moved to the US a few years ago, and so we're growing Jackhammer in the US. And so I spend half of my day from sort of 5 a.m. Pacific time, working in Africa time, with my team, with my clients, and then the rest of the day I'm in the US. So I've been straddling this interesting juxtaposition between what's happening in Africa and what's happening in the US. And when it comes to that lockdown experience, it was vastly different. So as you all know, if you've been living in South Africa for the last 2 years, a little longer than that, South Africa went into this incredibly tight, proper lockdown. And the US was very different. In fact, every state in the US was very different. Where lockdown was kind of more of a suggestion. The shelter in place was, if you feel like it, please stay at home. And in the US, Amazon delivers. Amazon delivers absolutely everything and delivered absolutely everything, except for the toilet paper. I don't know if you had the run on toilet paper in South Africa, but over here in the US, it was, well, certainly where I live, you would go into Target and the aisles would be completely bare. I'm still driving around my neighborhood, and when I look into people's garages, I know who the hoarders were because they still got the damn TV there. Anyway, within about a month of the whole world going into this global shelter-in-place, lockdown, pandemic situation, my business fell off a cliff. We place executives in very senior roles in companies, and when there's uncertainty, people press pause. And so we were about 75% down in volume and revenue within a month. And this don't panic. I wasn't panicked, but I was a bit like a deer in the headlights. And I really was concerned, alarmed, and needing to try and navigate the next few months ahead. And so I've lived through and worked through a global financial crisis, a couple of big other ups and downs. I've been around for a long time. And the one thing that I do know is that when you have these massive macroeconomic issues, get close to your clients. And so that's what I did. I was working from home. This is my favorite picture of me. I did the whole, I was the COVID cliche, all right? Baked the sourdough bread, colored my hair, was working from home and whatever I felt like. And there was this kind of like endless feeling of when was this going to end? But what I did was I started speaking to all of my clients every day, all over the world, Africa, US, everywhere. And the conversations that I started having with them was around how were they coping? What were they doing? How were they handling? Were they pivoting? How were they starting to communicate with their staff? How were they handling the productivity issues? And I started hearing so many different interesting stories around what people were doing to address the issues that were unprecedented for many of them, me included. And so what ultimately arose out of that was I just was hearing some trends, some really standout, amazing leaders who were stepping up in new ways, others who were not coping so well. And so I decided that there was a book there, and I decided I was going to get it out by January 2021. But then what started happening in January 2021, if you recall back a year and a bit ago, was the vaccine started to come out, certainly in the US, not so much in South Africa yet. And I did an edit because there was this semblance of, okay, maybe people were going to be able to come back to work. Maybe we weren't going to be stuck in this for too long. And so then I did another edit around about May, when certainly in the US, it was seeming like there was enough momentum with vaccinations for back to work to start to happen. And big companies were starting to plan for the back to work scenario. even in South Africa, vaccinations were starting to get rolled out. Then there was a month or so of between June and July where masks were relaxed in the US. And I was like, I wonder if this book's still going to be relevant. And then things closed down again because of Delta, and I kept editing and editing and editing this damn book. And eventually my publisher said to me, listen, we got to get this thing out. Your deadline is now. And so in August, I did my last edit, pre-Omicron. And then very excitingly, I'll have a little bit of a brag moment here. I managed to, the book was reached #1 bestseller on Amazon, which is a pretty awesome moment when your publisher sends you that notification, and particularly in amongst the company. I don't know if any of you have read Radical Candor, but it's a pretty great book, as well as the one by John Durr. And so what's the book about? The book is really, it started off as a record of what had been happening in this crazy time. And then I realized as a historical, as something that was a historical document, wasn't really that interesting. And where I eventually got to was I really wanted to, I could start to see that eventually at some point in the future, we were going to emerge from this. This wasn't going to be our forever state, but there were so many interesting lessons that were arising. And I wanted to capture those. And for the first time, really, since the Industrial Revolution, it's the first time that the whole world at a global scale has had to re-examine the way in which we work, right? So Industrial Revolution, first time ever, people go into these big factories where you've got layers of management and supervisors and shop floor people and workers and efficiencies. And obviously that's evolved over time, but that style of work where we commune in order to work together, in order to produce some kind of outcome, and we're managed by people who can see us, for the most part, that's how we've worked for a really, really long time. And this has been the first opportunity for the whole world to re-examine this and say, is this really the best way to do it? And honestly, this is an evolving story. You know, work from home, WFH, has been the acronym that we've used for the last 2 years. I saw a new acronym, RTO, Return to Office, in the last couple of months. Companies are making decisions about what the future is going to hold for them, how they feel they can be most effective and most productive. That's causing a lot of shift for a lot of people. Certainly, even you know, I was joking with my kids. I've become a stay-at-home mom. I mean, granted, I have a full-time job, but I work from home, and what that means is that I can be available for the things that need to happen with my kids, with my dog, with my house. I've had to go out the last couple of days to a conference. The amount of logistics that needed to be organized in order to make that happen was absolutely exhausting, aside from the in-person engagement with people directly. Nevertheless, there's a lot of shift and a lot of movement happening. But the idea of this hybrid is here, I hope, to stay. And why I say I hope to stay, because things really have evolved. And this global pandemic is going to leave an indelible stamp. What I want to share with you now are some of the key, like what's happening in the world of work in the US and South Africa, because I still straddle both of those worlds on a daily basis. And first of all, there really is a war for talent. It has a slightly different implication in the US and South Africa. In the US, there is the market is the talent market is the hottest that I've ever seen it, that many of my peers have ever seen it. I know that when I'm putting a candidate at even a C-level forward to a job in the US, if they're looking at my job or my client's job, they're probably looking at 2 or 3 others at the same time, and they're getting offers hot on the heels. And so in South Africa, it's slightly different. The job market is not as robust. But what we are seeing in this remote work, because of the remote work scenario, is that there are pockets of talent that are available and accessible to employers all over the world. And that's particularly relevant in the tech sector with engineers, developers, data scientists, etc. South Africa is known to be a hub for skilled workers. And this is not an entirely new thing, but it's not just the big corporates like Amazon Web Services, etc., that are picking up our South African talent. It's prolific companies all over the world, particularly in the US, in all areas, are after the talent. And you can work remotely. It's much easier these days to have an employer of record. And what that's doing is it's driving up salaries. And companies like, for example, Capitec, I was having a conversation with Harry Fourie last week, and he was saying to me, they have about 300 vacancies for digital data scientists, engineers, and that are almost unfillable because unfillable at an affordable price. So that's the first what's happening right now. There are certainly other pools of talent that, because it's super easy to have them as remote workers, as long as the time zones can work, South Africans are being recruited for these roles. Talent acquisition, for example, many global companies that are sourcing South Africans for that particular type of role, as an example. Then you've all heard this somewhat tired term, the Great Resignation. And once again, different in the US and South Africa because of the economics and because of the job market. Not quite as easy in South Africa to drop one thing and be assured of finding something else that will pay the bills and benefits. I was listening to a fascinating podcast. One of my favorites is Brene Brown, Dare to Lead. I'm sure you've heard of it. If not, a fantastic podcast to listen to. She was interviewing Dr. Donald and Charlie Scull about their recent research that they did for an MIT Sloan Management Review, where they did research on 600 companies, and they identified 125 aspects of company culture that employees talk about. And in fact, this Great Resignation, the greatest predictor of attrition, turnover, resignations, boils down to one thing: toxic culture. And toxic culture is evidenced by lack of inclusivity or exclusionary behavior, disrespect, lack of integrity or dishonesty, cutthroatness, abuse of managers. And so whereas the impact of this in the US has been individuals really reevaluating their lives, taking time to think about how they want to be in the world of work, as well as a very hot job market, and people have just decided they've had enough of environments where the experience of being at work, whether they're in an office or at home, feels painful. South Africa, we have it less so in terms of we don't have the droves of resignations for the reasons I've shared, but people are unhappy. They're unhappy, and that leads to grievance. Those grievances may be expressed or they may not be. But unhappy people, as we know, results in one main thing: lack of engagement, lack of productivity, and just reduced output. As well as it spills over. And as you know, I don't know what kinds of work environments you find yourselves in, but unhappy people, that in itself has its own level of toxicity. Burnout. Burnout is burning. Burnout is a real thing, everybody. It's not just something that happens when you pull a few all-nighters. What I'm talking about is this almost a disease, and I've spoken to a couple of psychotherapists and doctors that treat mental illness. it is so endemic in this pandemic, this burnout. Now, if you think about your colleagues and peers that you work with, there probably is one, maybe more people who are actually suffering from this as a chronic experience, prolonged stress and anxiety. And you'll see this because people that you have known for a while, all of a sudden they're like really quick to snap. They just don't have a level of tolerance or resilience. They're in this kind of flight or fight survivalist mode. Everything that you say to them, they'll take offense to. There's this passive aggressiveness that they might display. The reason is that they really are, they're in the survivalist mode that's caused by this prolonged experience of being so stressed out. And so they're very defensive. I wish I was in a room to say, is this something you've noticed? Because I'm pretty sure there'll be many people who'll be raising their hands. I've had this experience with one, with one individual in my team where I was like, what the hell, what's going on here? And so because of that, I had to do this deep dive into burnout and the impact. The problem with and the challenge around burnout is that it's hard to address because the moment you approach somebody to say, hey, I want to help you, they take that as a threat. So if you say, I think you should, how about getting a therapist, or what about taking a break? Oh my goodness, that's not going to go down well. So it's pretty tricky to help people who are in this survivalist burnout phase. And if there are any questions on how you might want to deal with that, we can possibly talk about that in a bit. And then a moment for the leaders, please. Leaders are under unprecedented stress. I feel that there has been a responsibility that has been thrust on leaders. Yes, you sit in the leadership seat, therefore you should take that accountability. But these rocks, bombs, shrapnel that got thrust into the leadership role over the last 2 years, nobody was prepared for this. And not only the usual stuff around the usual pressures that leaders deal with and can usually handle with relative skill, what leaders and managers have had to try and address in the last 2 years has been extraordinary. And not everybody has been equipped for it. And the usual flack that leaders or managers get for doing this poorly or not communicating well or not having empathy or all the knots, many of those would absolutely have been exacerbated during this time when it has been so hard to lead well, particularly if you didn't have a strong base to come off. And so what we see in the US is a massive turnaround of CEOs at all levels of organizations and C-level, much greater than they would have been pre-pandemic. I haven't got data around what's happening in South Africa, but just to say that burnout experience carries through the whole organization. So where are we? By the way, I hope everybody's doing okay. I've been talking for about 20 minutes or so. I want to really just talk through a few of the trends that I see, and then we can go into some Q&A. So there are 5 key trends that I want to touch on here. This idea around hyper-personalization of the employee experience. Employees got a taste of something different, and for some of them, it really worked. Now there's this new potential opportunity around hybrid for some, and companies are needing to make decisions, leaders are needing to make decisions about what this looks like and how things can work most effectively. The reality is that it's almost impossible to cater to each individual in an organization, particularly a large organization. In smaller ones, there may be a lot more opportunity for personalization. When I say hyper-personalization, I'm really referring to the hyper-personalization of teams, because I think where things can get quite well suited to groups, to smaller groups, around, do we work together on certain days? Are we working synchronously or asynchronously? Are we working at home? Where there's an opportunity for latitude and to cater to and support individual teams and individuals within that team who get a say in how they want their work environment to be, that is going to be a massive stride in loyalty, retention, and overall employee experience. It is impossible to adjust to everybody's particular wants and needs, but it's becoming possible to say, this team of engineers, or this team of salespeople, or this team of whatever the function is, marketing, how does this team need to work? And can we address this team's needs in a way that works for most of the people most of the time? So that is the first thing. Then I've been encouraging all of my clients, anybody I speak to examine what is the purpose of the office, and making sure that the office actually becomes a place of purpose. And what I mean by that is, when you're asking people to come back to the office, to sit in traffic, to get dressed, to do all the things, organize their lives in order to do exactly the same thing that they were doing at home, it's going to be a bit of a grudge. You're going to have people who are feeling resentful about that experience. And so what is the reason for bringing people back to the office if that's a decision that companies are making? That's a decision that team leaders are making. And that's this conversation is a conversation that I'm encouraging organizations to have and leaders to have with their people. Why do we want to be here? What is the reason for us actually doing the thing that we've been doing since the Industrial Revolution, arriving at a place to work in synchronous time together, in order for what? If it's in order to collaborate, make sure that there are more opportunities to collaborate. If it is to socialize and connect, make sure there are times and opportunities and an intention around making the office a place to do that. If it is to learn, because the office is a great place of learning. If people are just going to go straight into their cubicles and not do the mutual learning, what is the point? So if as a collective, there are decisions around what is the point of being here, there is a much greater buy-in, even though some may still feel that it's not really their cup of tea, or they prefer not to be doing it all the time. There's a much greater buy-in because people get to see what's the purpose of being here. Then I've touched on mental, emotional well-being with the burnout situation. There's much more attention on this. And really, issues around mental well-being have been around for a really long time, okay? It didn't just all of a sudden happen in the pandemic, but we were forced to take a spotlight and actually shine it on the amount of stress, anxiety, burnout, unhappiness, unwellness that people experience in their work environments, because it became so prolific. And I saw during the last 2 years, many companies who made big strides in supporting that with their teams. Some would have in-house counselors and psychotherapists. Some would have group therapy sessions or talk sessions. Some would offer a stipend for people to actually get an outside therapist. Some had other kinds of mental, emotional wellness and support. Some have appointed a chief wellness officer and taking care. And this is beyond, I think, where we saw wellness creep into the workplace pre-pandemic was more around additional benefits like yoga and meditation in the room in the corner. This is more addressing the actual needs of the individual. I and my team, at the beginning of just over a year ago, I announced to my team, I think everybody here needs to have a therapist. I've got a therapist. I don't know how anybody survives in the world without one, and I'm going to pay for therapy for a year. And it took a really, really long time for people to take me up on my offer. because there is such a stigma around it. And it took about 9 months before my whole team had actually decided to take up the offer, and it was completely confidential, but it took a lot of normalizing it, talking about it, destigmatizing it, in order to make this something that was a sticky benefit. And now it's clearly going to be part of the benefit scheme that I offer into the future, and probably the best one I've ever offered. 2 more points: inclusion, equity, and bias. We talk about diversity a lot. We talk about inclusion a lot. How this impacts the hybrid workplace has got a slightly different lens. And think about this. There will be situations where we've got sometimes people in office and sometimes people working from home. And there may have been the opportunity for people to choose when and where. It may be asynchronous. You may find that leaders are the ones who actually are coming into the office because they like to be there. It's easier for them to engage and lead and strategize and collaborate. And what happens when people are in person is there are many, many micro decisions that happen every single day. And people who are not there in office are not going to be participating in those micro decisions and in those project movements and in those, and they're not going to be visible. And so what is already happening is people who are not being seen are not getting promoted. They're not getting opportunities for projects. They're getting left behind. And so unless there's an absolute intention to make sure that there's a level playing field for everybody, regardless of where you work, this is something that will creep into the workplace, and there needs to be some attention to that. And then lastly, leadership development and toxic culture is in the spotlight. There's more talk about it. Certainly in the US, I am seeing the conversation happening with my clients in South Africa and Africa too. And the point of that is to say, we need that once there is awareness, you can't unsee what you've now seen. And then once you see it, you need to address it. And ongoing work around leadership developments we've always spoken about leadership development, but not in the context of actually exposing abusive work environments, disrespectful work environments, exclusionary work environments. And that is going to be, in my view, one of the issues that gets a lot of attention going forward. Okay, my monologue is done. And
thanks, Debbie. Thank you so much for those insights. And just so that everyone knows, these insights are in Debbie's book, so it's a really interesting read. I enjoyed it. What I also liked about it is some quotes in there. I'll end off with one a little bit later. But Debbie, I see there's a hand up. So maybe we can ask Yossi to introduce themselves and ask their question in person.
Let's wait for Sean.
Yossi, over to you.
But he's a bit completely. He's lost it.
Okay, seems like some technical difficulties there. I'll kick off with a question. Debbie, I don't know if there's stats related to this, or if you can just talk about what you've seen in the market, but has empathy increased or decreased based on what's happening? Because, work at home moms, online schooling, all sorts of things, people had a really tough time the last 2 years adapting. But what has happened to empathy?
So I don't have data on sort of the scale. I have an anecdotal take on this, based on the fact that I speak to like so many people and companies on a daily basis. Empathy just got a huge hike. We've been talking about leading with empathy for years, and all of a sudden we actually did. And it happened because of this leveling of the playing fields to a degree. Granted, I want to say this with caution, this was not an entirely level playing field. We know that some people had really unbelievably harsh situations to have to endure with kids and difficult. I mean, if you haven't got internet, or if your bandwidth is poor, and we're still experiencing that right now, how on earth do you work? So we know that that was not an entirely level playing field at all. But for the first time, workers and managers were having to deal with some of the same things. And people were really needing to extend themselves to taking a peek into each other's lives. The veil, and I say it's a veil between personal and home, personal and work, where it's like, okay, just want you to leave your personal stuff at home and just come to work and be professional. I mean, I don't believe that that's possible in any case, but it was completely impossible now, right? Personal and work was completely in the salad mix. And so what that did was it gave people an opportunity to see each other's lives. And when you can see each other, you have a huge increase in raising empathy. Over time, and there was a lot of willingness to tolerate the baby and the dog and all the things. In fact, my dog is possibly going to peek up here in a second because he hasn't learned to behave during this time, and he's a COVID dog, so he doesn't know any better. But people's patience has worn thin, and everybody has. I think there's been a wane on the empathy scale, and there's a lot more. There's a lot less tolerance. There's a lot more just get your act together. There's and of all the things that I would be sad to see reduced to where it was pre-pandemic, that is one of the qualities that got just activated. It's possible. We can lead with empathy. Why can't we do this persistently and really take into account the humans that are in our work environments? So no data, but I just wish that there is a way for us to sustain the humanity of the way in which we worked for certainly the first year.
Thanks, Debbie. We've got a question from Asif. Asif, welcome to the webinar. You can just unmute yourself and engage with Debbie directly.
Hi, Asif.
Hi, Debbie. You talk about working from home and the challenges, but with your three triplets, I think there must be lovely young ladies today. They're absolutely awesome to work with, and they're very manageable. So I'm sure you'll manage there, Debbie. That's not the issue. But the question that I wanted to ask really was more about, you've got this work from home or work, or a hybrid environment. And anecdotally, and if you've got any statistics or any data, what happens to productivity and quality of output? And that's kind of irrespective, and I take the view, irrespective whether you work from office or work from home, ultimately the ultimate, if you might call it, test is the quality of output and the quality of productivity. And do you have a loss in that or not? It's like, for example, online learning at a primary school, definitely you lose quality of learning without a doubt. We know that, it's proven that. University, you do, but less so than at primary school if you do online learning. So if you can maybe comment on that, that'd be great, Debbie. And great to see you again. You look as young as ever, as I know you from many, many years ago. Thanks.
Zoom filter, Asif. Okay, so productivity. So I've had some many interesting conversations with the CEOs of companies that run big teams of developers, software engineers, developers, who remarked at how productivity increased substantially and noticeably for several reasons. We had the pervasive view was that by working in these collaborative environments, in these open plan offices, which has been a trend over the last 2 decades, we would have an opportunity to collaborate and therefore be productive. I'm not sure who came up with that idea. I mean, obviously collaboration does lead to productivity, but the open plan office is unbelievably distracting. right? And so so the data points that I have in from real experience is that productivity increased noticeably, particularly in environments where people were previously working in big open plan spaces, who then had the time to actually focus on their work. And so there was that data point. The other is that if we look at the spectrum of productivity in employees in general, you're going to have the range. You're going to have your top 20 to 25% who are the superstars. They're going to be productive regardless of where they are, right? You're going to have the middle ones who are going to be, they need a little bit of more motivation. They work better with a little bit of intervention and prodding or peer pressure. And then you've got the bottom performers who are going to be the bottom performers wherever they are. And that matched the scenario when people went to work from home. The ones that were superstars were going to be the superstars wherever. The ones who were going to sit on the couch and watch TV, they're probably doing the same thing at their desks at the office in any case. And then you have the middle ones who needed a lot of work, but that's where managers really placed a lot of time and attention. And so there were certain pockets of productivity that were affected, and they were mostly around the need for the quality of collaboration that was really difficult to do remotely, and people worked around it. If you think about the amount of energy that you get from engaging in person with people and how that spurs the next round of work, so to speak, you lack that, right? So I think that over the 2-year period or certainly the first year of people working almost remotely, and we're talking about professional services, right? Because obviously many people had to go to the office or to their work environments. There was a strong motivation for many people to actually keep up their productivity, because certainly in the initial phases, there was this fear around retrenchments, furloughs, people losing their jobs. And so what we actually saw in some instances, and this was probably for the first 6 to 9 months, and then petered out, was people overcompensating, people being always on, always available. And that just took a toll for everybody. For some, that's become a normalized way of working. But I'd say that overall, not learning, productivity didn't necessarily lag the way that companies expected, and in some cases actually increased.
So Debbie, on that line of productivity, I think for a lot of people, it was difficult to draw the lines in terms of when is it work time, when is it home time, and that might have contributed to some of the mental health issues. But in terms of the burnout that you spoke about, it seems like there's still a stigma towards burnout, similar to what you would see in a stigma against depression, etc. Madit Chavez asked a question, what trends or best practice have you seen for dealing or assisting staff with mental health issues, but particularly in the financial services? And she notes that what you did for staff was very commendable, but how could it work in large organizations dealing with this particular issue?
So yes, in small companies, one can take a very personal approach to that. In larger companies, so let's just talk about the stigma, because that is a real thing. It's much easier to call in sick and say, I hurt my back, or I broke my leg, or something sore, and nobody even bats an eye. It's, of course, you've got to stay at home and you've got to heal. It's much more of a big deal to say, hey, I'm really suffering from some kind of, I'm having a mental breakdown of sorts. People are terrified of that. They're terrified to show weakness, lack of resilience, lack of the inability to cope. For all of those reasons, it impacts much more significantly on people's view of them, how they judge them. If they have reduced mental capacity or emotional capacity than if there's a physical illness, right? So let's start out there and say the stigma is real. And so first of all, what companies need to do, large and small, is they have to normalize and destigmatize the situation around mental wellness, to make it okay for people to say, hey, I'm going through a hard time right now, for people to be willing to take the help, the offer of help, because that is the biggest issue. You could put on the whole menu and the whole buffet of mental wellness benefits. You can have an in-house counselor, you can pay for therapy, you can bring in the whole orchestra. But if people don't feel safe to actually register or pick their hand up and say, I want to take this benefit, that is, it's going to be a waste of time and money. And so first of all, normalizing confidentiality is absolutely essential. There has to be a way for people to feel that regardless of whether it's normalized or not in a work environment, that the entire experience will be completely confidential. And so, so those are the two things that have to be in place before you can get uptake for this kind of benefit.
Thanks, Debbie. So give the options, and it's for them to really grab in terms of what's available. There's a question from an anonymous attendee asking, what do you think the work from home or hybrid situation is more suitable to different age groups, millennials versus others? So all of our others are grouped together.
And all the others. Listen, let's start out by saying, this age group grouping is a thing that I think marketers actually came up with. And I see people with a full range and full spectrum of approach to work and work ethic, regardless of age. So let me just put there as a little pin. But I think people are more suited depending on their very personal circumstances. So if you live in a home where there's a good workspace and you've got internet and you are more productive working on your own, fantastic, then you're more suited to it. If you are single, want to be immersed with other people during the day, start to fade because you need other people's energy because you're more of an extroverted person, being in an office is going to be really good for you. If you and then you speak to the moms have the moms with young kids have gotten a lot of visibility and airtime because they endured so much when their kids were not at school and got the brunt or the burden. Mostly, I don't want to generalize too much, but certainly from my experience, got the burden of the schooling together with work. Some of them are loving being back in the office. And others really got a taste of what it's like to be able to manage their day and were able to still be productive and have this experience of being available for their younger kids. And so when I say hyper-personalization, that's really what I'm digging into. What are the circumstances that individuals find themselves in that would make working from home or office better for them and their team, for the company because they're productive, for them to feel like the company is really taking them as a person into consideration. That's how you get loyalty. That's how you get retention. That's how you get productivity, actually.
If you think of the actual workspaces, so you spoke about open plan offices, etc. It's really difficult to have a virtual meeting in an open plan office setting. And I think historically, the offices, the ergonomics were just not set up for a hybrid world. Do you anticipate changes in terms of layouts of office and workspace in the near future?
I've already been seeing in some physical offices where there are spaces allocated for people to take private meetings because, virtual meetings has not just been the last 2 years. I think that will just increase, but agreed. Having a remote call when there's noise in the background and you can't keep doing the mute thing is super inconvenient. So, so you'll definitely see the things change in that respect when there's the need to still have partly virtual and partly in person, more spaces allocated for virtual meetings.
Thanks, Debbie. In terms of the future and leaders, what traits do you think we're going to need to be a leader in the hybrid world? What's going to stand out? I think we already discussed empathy, but are there any hard and soft skills that you think we need to really work on and amplify to get ready for this hybrid world?
So, I actually attended I did a presentation at one of the colleges in the US a few weeks ago, and I went around the room and I said, hey guys, tell me what you think your top quality is for a leader. What do you need to be as a leader? And there were maybe, I don't know, 50 students in the class, and there were 50 different things that people came up with. Like, what do you need? I was like, yeah. It was an MBA class. It's like, okay, who's up for this leadership job now? If you expect leaders to have all of these things, but you asked a question around what's really relevant and pertinent to this hybrid world. I think there's, first of all, the actual logistics of learning how to manage remotely. What are we've done, we've been practicing in a few different ways. How do we do the check-ins? How much time, when do we actually bring people together? As a remote manager, what are your accountabilities and what's the individual's accountabilities? Do we have an agreement around what that looks like? So adjusting to the idea that the hybrid world becomes the standard. What are the new ways of being, and what are the new ways in which we contract with one another as a leader and a manager to make sure that we're all managing our expectations around what our accountabilities are. So that, for many individuals, teams, has not really been set. We're just kind of rolling with it without a service level agreement between ourselves as to who does what, who's accountable for what our expectations are with one another, so that we can have a level of certainty. I think for leaders as well, that idea around being able to provide some kind of safety and certainty in an uncertain world is really critical. Now, leaders themselves may not know what's up ahead, but even being able to give as much clarity and certainty as possible to people helps them tremendously. As a leader, you often do have a little bit more foresight, a little bit more insight into what's up ahead, because you're having the leadership discussions, you're in the management conversations, and being able to communicate that so that individuals are feeling as safe and secure as possible. When people are, we're human, we're wired for fight or flight or freeze. And when we have safety, our whole nervous system can relax. When our nervous system can relax, we can focus on the task at hand. So for leaders to actually take that and translate that into, how can I provide the safest, most secure environment despite the uncertainties for my team, is another sort of next thing for engagement, retention, great culture. And then lastly, just around that, when cracks appear, you've got to lean into the cracks. Now, I know lean in has become a bit of a cliched term. What is that? What the hell does that actually mean? But when the cracks appear, when people are getting irritable with one another, when they're niggling with each other, when they're having these little, virtual boxing matches, when the conflicts arise, you need to step into that and get people to communicate. You need to get people to talk to each other. You need to get people to, even virtually, spend time together, cultivate at one point, a year ago, we were spending a lot of time doing these social get-togethers where we had time that wasn't just work related. If you're going to continue with a hybrid environment, you need to continue with all of those devices and tools that we were using in order to stay connected. Don't forget about those. because when people become disconnected, and in a hybrid world, we're going to have this kind of all over the showness, you need to really pour into the cracks so that people can stay as connected as possible.
Debbie, and on that very strong notes and pearls of wisdom, thank you so much for today. Thank you for joining us. In terms of the competition winner, anonymous, sorry, we can't give you a prize, but Asif and Marichaba were the two potential contenders, and I've made an executive decision that you will both receive a copy of the book. So thank you so much for your contribution. Debbie, I'm going to end off with a quote from your book. What I love about your book is that regardless, so you've given so many nuggets, but there's also great quotes from other leaders in your book. And I'd like to end off with this one. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. So Debbie, thank you so much. You definitely didn't do nothing. You gave us great pools of wisdom today and in the book. And we wish you all the best success in the future.
Such a pleasure to be here, and have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. I'm about to start mine. It's 8 a.m. So
thanks, Debbie. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.